The year 2015 was a strange time in the American consciousness. It was a time when the dark web was no longer a fringe concept, when whispers of black markets for everything from drugs to human organs were becoming mainstream anxieties. This was the backdrop against which the story of Leo Hayes unfolded, a story that began as a simple missing person case in the humid, Spanish moss-draped town of Boudreaux, Louisiana, and spiraled into a tale of jealousy, revenge, and murder. On the 6th of May, 2015, a high school kid named TJ got a call from his mother. His father, Leo Hayes, 48 years old, was missing. He hadn't been seen for 2 days. This wasn't entirely out of character for Leo. He was a gambler, a man who lived his life by the turn of a card. He called himself the Cajun King of Cards, a self-proclaimed title that was met with a mixture of amusement and derision in the smoky backroom poker games he frequented. He rarely held a steady job, preferring to live on the adrenaline-fueled roller coaster of his winnings. Sometimes he was flush, buying new cars and expensive jewelry. Other times, he was deep in debt, dodging loan sharks and angry bookies. But this time felt different. An eyewitness, an old man named Mr. Boudreaux, who spent his days watching the world go by from the porch of the local VFW hall, told the police he had seen something. 2 or 3 days earlier, he had seen Leo being led out of a smoky poker room by a group of big, rough-looking men. They weren't gentle about it. The police investigation started at the poker room, a dimly lit, cigar-stained den behind a nondescript bar. The bartender and a few of the regulars confirmed Mr. Boudreaux's story. 4 or 5 men, all built like linebackers, had come in. They had a photo on their phone. They showed it around asking for Leo Hayes. When they found him at a back table, they said they were there to take him to see someone about a debt. Leo, surprisingly, hadn't put up a fight. He just stood up, collected his chips, and went with them. They had left in a silver pickup truck and a beat-up minivan. The initial theory was a debt collection gone wrong. But when the detectives started digging into Leo's finances, the theory fell apart. He had been on a winning streak lately. He had paid off most of his significant debts. The only people he still owed money to were small-time players, a few $100s here and there. It didn't make sense to hire a crew of professional thugs for such a small amount. The motive wasn't a minor gambling debt. This was something bigger. Security cameras from a gas station down the street captured the vehicles leaving the area, a silver Toyota Tundra and a Dodge Caravan heading north out of town. The license plates were visible. A quick check of the DMV records led them to a man named Mr. Landry, the owner of a local seafood market. His business was only about 3 miles from where Leo lived. Mr. Landry was celebrating his birthday on the night of May 4th. He had thrown a big party at a local karaoke bar. He told the police that his nephew, a 25-year-old named Jamie Landry, had borrowed his truck and his wife's minivan for an hour or 2 during the party. Jamie had no steady job, a reputation for being a hothead, and a known association with a rough crowd. He lived in a small town called Belle Reve, just across the parish line. The detectives could find no connection between Jamie Landry and Leo Hayes, no shared acquaintances, no known disputes, no debts. And Jamie's behavior was strange. Despite being the one who had led the abduction, he seemed genuinely worried about Leo's whereabouts. He even called a few of Leo's known associates, asking if they had seen him. It was clear that Jamie wasn't the mastermind. He was a hired hand. The investigation into Jamie's background revealed that he and his friends were a crew of 4 hire muscle. They specialized in debt collection, using intimidation and violence to squeeze money out of people. This strengthened the police's suspicion that Leo had been abducted over a large, undisclosed debt, one that his family knew nothing about. Then came the first twist in the case. Leo's son, TJ, was cleaning out his father's desk when he found a small, folded piece of paper tucked into a notebook. It was a handwritten note from his father. It said, "If anything bad happens to me, it's because of a man named Luke." Leo's family had never heard the name before. TJ immediately took the note to the police. The detectives ran the name through their databases. They found 2 men named Luke in the area. One was a local shrimper. The other was a construction worker who had been working on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico for the past year. Neither of them seemed to have any connection to Leo Hayes or the world of high-stakes poker. Adding to the mystery, Leo's wife and son did something that raised a major red flag. They burned all of his belongings, his clothes, his papers, his notebooks. They claimed it was a local tradition, a way of helping the soul of the deceased move on. But to the police, it looked like the destruction of evidence. They were particularly suspicious of Leo's wife, but a thorough investigation turned up no link between her and her husband's disappearance. On May 16th, 12 days after Leo was taken, the police got a tip. Jamie Landry and his crew were planning to skip town. A SWAT team descended on Jamie's house and arrested him and his accomplices without incident. Under questioning, Jamie and his crew cracked. They confessed that they had been hired by a man named Ryan Haynes, a 40-year-old local tough with a rap sheet for petty theft. They were paid $3,000 to abduct Leo Hayes. They said they had dropped Leo off at a designated meeting point, a remote hunting cabin deep in the Manchac swamp, and handed him over to a middle-aged man they didn't recognize. It wasn't Ryan Haynes. The detectives picked up Ryan Haynes. He also confessed. He said he had been hired by a friend, a 41-year-old man named Lee Foster. Lee had offered him $5,000 to find a crew to collect a gambling debt from Leo Hayes. Ryan had kept $2,000 for himself and paid Jamie's crew the other $3,000. The chain of command was becoming clear. The detectives brought in Lee Foster. He was another unemployed drifter with a minor criminal record. He too confessed. He said he had been hired by a man named Luke to abduct Leo over a gambling debt. This was it. The confirmation. The mastermind was the man from the note. But which Luke? The shrimper or the oil rig worker? The detectives discovered that the oil rig worker, Luke Sterling, had suddenly returned from his job in the Gulf on May 3rd, the day before the abduction. And just as suddenly, he had flown back to the rig on the morning of May 5th, the day after. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Luke Sterling was their man. But the motive still didn't make sense. Luke Sterling had been working offshore for a year. He wasn't known to be a gambler. Why would he have a $100,000 gambling dispute with Leo Hayes? With Luke out of the country, on an oil rig in international waters, the investigation stalled. The district attorney's office began the long, complicated process of issuing an international warrant for his arrest. Meanwhile, Lee Foster, the middleman, filled in the rest of the story. He said that Luke Sterling had met him on May 3rd, the day he got back to town. He told Lee a story about lending $100,000 to someone without a written contract, and now the man was refusing to pay him back. He offered Lee $10,000 to help him get his money. Lee had devised the plan to abduct the debtor and force him to sign a promissory note. He then hired Ryan Haynes, who in turn hired Jamie Landry's crew. On the night of May 4th, after Jamie's crew had snatched Leo from the poker room, they drove him to the hunting cabin in the swamp. Lee Foster was there to meet them. He called Luke Sterling to tell him the job was done. Luke arrived a short time later. Lee and the others left after Luke had Leo tied to a chair. It took over 9 months, but in June of 2016, the authorities finally caught up with Luke Sterling. He wasn't on the oil rig. He had fled, crossing the border into Mexico and then making his way back into the U.S. through Texas. He was arrested in a cheap motel in Houston. In the interrogation room, the truth finally came out, and it had nothing to do with a gambling debt. The motive was jealousy, pure, simple, and deadly. In May of 2015, while he was on the oil rig, Luke Sterling had discovered a series of romantic, explicit text messages on his wife's phone. They were from Leo Hayes. His wife admitted to the affair. She claimed she wanted to end it, but that Leo was blackmailing her, threatening to tell Luke everything. Luke had confronted Leo once before on a previous trip home. He had warned him to stay away from his wife, or he would end up dead. The note that TJ had found was likely Leo's response to that threat, a desperate attempt to protect himself from beyond the grave. After that confrontation, Luke had gone back to the rig, but he had learned from a cousin back home that the affair was still going on. He felt humiliated, enraged. He decided to get his revenge. He flew home, concocted the fake story about the gambling debt, and set his murderous plan in motion. After the hired muscle had left, Luke had taken Leo deeper into the swamp. He demanded that Leo end the affair, that he stop threatening his wife. Leo's response was arrogant, dismissive. He told Luke that the affair was consensual. He said that if it wasn't him, it would be someone else. He called Luke's wife a promiscuous woman who couldn't be satisfied. That was the final straw. Luke Sterling snapped. He pushed Leo to the ground. He held his face down in the soft, thick mud of the swamp with his boot, pressing down until Leo stopped struggling. He thought Leo had just passed out. He dragged him about 100 yards deeper into a thicket of cypress trees and left him there. The next morning, a nagging sense of unease brought him back. He brought a shovel and a large burlap sack with him. He found Leo's body where he had left it. It was stiff, cold. He was dead. Luke dragged the body another 100 yards, found a secluded spot, and buried him in a shallow grave. After his arrest, he led the police back to the Manchac swamp, but after nearly a year, the landscape had changed. The dense vegetation had overgrown the area. He couldn't pinpoint the exact location of the grave. The police brought in cadaver dogs. They searched an area of over 30 square yards, digging down 2 feet into the muck and mud. Finally, they found it, a rotting blue burlap sack containing human remains. DNA analysis confirmed it was the body of Leo Hayes. The forensic examination found no other injuries, but there were signs consistent with suffocation. Luke Sterling's confession was largely corroborated by the evidence. In January of 2017, Luke Sterling was sentenced to death. The accomplices, the chain of hired hands that had led to the murder, received sentences ranging from 5 to 10 years for illegal detention. The case of the Cajun King of Cards was closed. It was a story that had begun with whispers of black market organ harvesting and ended in a swamp with a motive as old as time itself. The commentary in the local papers reflected on the tragedy. They talked about the wife's infidelity as the catalyst, about the destructive power of jealousy. They wrote about how a man's pride, wounded by betrayal, could fester into a rage so powerful it could lead him to orchestrate a kidnapping and a murder. It was a dark, swamp-born tragedy, a reminder that in the humid, tangled landscape of human emotions, the most dangerous predators are often the ones we know, the ones we trust, the ones we love.